Consider a weighted voting system with 3 players. If only player 1 has veto power and there are no dummies, find the Bahnhof power distribution. Okay, a couple of important phrases for us here. Only player 1 has veto power and there are no dummies. So let's pay attention to those important words. Let's find the Bahnhof power distribution. Now, how do we find the Bahnhof power distribution? We have to list out the various combinations. So let's start with 2 players. So with 2 players, we could have player 1, player 2, player 1, player 3, or player 2, player 3. Now, which of those I'm going to list all winning coalitions. So I'm going to list all winning coalitions. Now, are those all 3? Are all 3 of these teams, are these all winning teams or not? How do we figure that out? Well, player 1 has veto power. What does veto power mean? Veto power means if player 1 is not on the team, then the team loses. Right? Player 1's critical, in other words. If he's not on the team loses. So this is not a winning team, is it? Because it doesn't have player 1. The other 2 teams, this one and this one, they both have player 1, so it looks like they're winning teams. Okay, let's go on now to 3 players. So with 3 players, that's all 3. There's only 3 players in the game. So player 1, player 2, and player 3. We're assuming that that's a winning team also. Okay, so that's all the winning teams. There can't be a 1-player winning team. I skipped the 1 player because if any 1-player team was a winner, then that person would be a dictator, right? If that person alone could win, then he's a dictator. And that would make the other people dummies. And they said there's no dummies. Did you follow that logic? If I did 1 player, and I said, okay, maybe player 1 alone can win. That couldn't be, because if he did alone win, then that means he's a dictator, and that means the other 2 are dummies. Whenever you have a dictator, the others are dummies, meaning they don't have any power. And it said right here, there's no dummies. So if there's no dummies, then there's no dictators, there's no 1-player winners. So it takes 2 players to win, or 3. 2 or 3 players to win, because there's no dummies. Everybody matters in this situation. Okay, so now we have to go back and find out who the winning coalitions are. I'm going to underline. So step 1 is list the winning coalitions. Step 2 is to underline all critical players. Now remember what a critical player is. Critical player means if they drop out, then the team loses. So they're critical. If they drop out, then the team loses. So that's what critical means. So let's go through it. Let's underline it. If player 1 drops out of this team, does it become a losing team? Yes, because it's only got player 2, remember, and it said player 1 has veto power, which means player 1, if player 1's not on the team loses. So if player 1 dropped out, if player 1 dropped out of this team, it would only have player 2, which could not be a winning team any longer because it doesn't have player 1. So yes, player 1 is critical. So I'll underline player 1. How about player 2? If player 2 drops out of this team and it's just player 1, so you just go through them one at a time. If player 2 drops out of this team and it's just player 1, does that become a losing team? Yes, it must, because remember there's no one-player winners. So if player 2 dropped out and it was just player 1, that's only one player, that's got to be a losing team. Why? Because no one-player team is a winner, because that person would be a dictator and the others would be dummies, and they said there's no dummies. So yes, player 2 is critical. So by the same logic, all these are critical, aren't they? Because if any one of those dropped out, you'd only have one player left, and a one-player team cannot be a winner, because that would mean that person's a dictator if he can win alone, and everybody else is dummies, and they told us there's no dummies in this problem. No dummies. Nobody is powerless. Let's go on to the 3-player situation. Is player 1, should I underline player 1? Is he critical here? If player 1 drops out, does this team become a loser? Yes, because it doesn't have player 1 anymore. And it said right here, player 1 has veto power, which means if player 1 is not on the team loses. So if player 1 drops out, they lose. So player 1 will be underlined. Player 1 is critical. He must be, if he drops out, right, that's what critical means. If he drops out, the team loses. Let's go to player 2. If player 2 drops out, does that become a losing team? They just have player 1 and 3 now. No, that's a winning team still, right? They have 2 players, player 1, player 3, and they do have player 1, right? You got to have player 1. Like I said right here, player 1's got to be on the team. That's still a winning team. So that means player 2 there is not critical to that team. We can lose player 2 and the team will still win. He's not critical in this situation on this team. So we'll skip him. How about player 3? If player 3 drops out, is he critical? Does the team, critical means if they drop out, then the team loses. If player 3 drops out, does that become a losing team? They just have P1 and P2. No, they're still okay. P1 and P2 are still a winning team because it's 2 players and they have P1. Right, you got to have P1, and they have 2 players, so that's still a winning team. So P3 is not critical either in this situation. So the only critical one on this team is player 1, and then, of course, all these guys were critical over on these teams. So now let's put this all together. How many critical times do we have going on here? So we'll do player 1, player 2, and player 3. We're going to determine the Bahnhof power. There's 5 times that people were underlined. 5 times in which people were critical. 5 critical times. 5 underlines. And so of those, how many are P1? 1, 2, 3 of the 5 times that people were underlined as critical, they really made a critical, important difference, it was player 1. Player 2, 1 out of 5 right here. And player 3, 1 out of 5 right there. So there's our answer. If you change that to a decimal, this is 0.6, 0.2, 0.2. The system will take fractions or decimals, it doesn't matter. So that's how the power goes. Player 1 has 60% of the power. Players 2 and 3 each have 20% of the power in this scenario, in this situation. So the 3 steps in doing a Bahnhof power distribution. Step 1, right here, list all the winning coalitions. We did that. And we crossed this one out because that was not a winner. So just these 2 and this one, those were all the winning teams. There was no one-player winning teams because that'd be a dictator and that would mean the others are dummies, and so there's no dummies. So first off, list all the winning coalitions. Then underline all the critical players. We did that, underline, underline. These 5 were critical, meaning if they dropped out, the team would lose. So 5 times people were critical. 3 out of 5 were player 1, 1 out of 5, and 1 out of 5 players 2 and 3.